In a way, I may be just looking at it from a distorted, optimistic point of view. I think the next 2 years might be better than they have been in this past 2 years. Yeah. Well, there are two reasons for that. One is that the Republicans so far have been totally irresponsible. They've not taken responsibility for anything. And they've deprived President Obama of any votes on key issues. Sometimes he hasn't got a single vote in the House or Senate, as you know. Now that they have taken control of the House of Representatives, they'll be responsible for a major element of the U.S. government, that is the House of Representatives. How they vote in there, they'll have to go to the American people and say, this is the way we voted and this is why. So they'll be more responsible. And I think and I believe in the next 2 years, President Obama will be much more independent in fighting hard to prevail and not trying to reach out, which turned out to be fruitlessly, to get 2 or 3 Republican votes for this and that, and being maybe too accommodating and compromising early. So I think he's going to be a much more tough proponent of what he stands for, maybe in the future, giving up on Republican support and taking his case to the American public.
Would that be your advice to him?
Well, it would be, yes. He doesn't need my advice.
Regarding Iran, do you think that the sanctions that the West has put on Iran will prevent them from becoming a nuclear power?
I don't think so. I think the decision about whether or not to become a nuclear power will be made by Iranians, and I think the outside sanctions will have very little effect on them. One of the things that concerns me is that the threats of military attacks against Iran from Israel or from the United States probably is a factor that might be considered by Iran whether or not to go with nuclear weapons or not. If I were the president of Iran, if I was in charge, of course the president's not in charge in Iran, and other powers were threatening to attack me and destroy my nation, even with the use of nuclear weapons, which we have said we might do, then that would be one factor in making me go with nuclear weapons. So I would hope that the diplomatic process and negotiations will be successful.
Do you think that there's any surprise in the disclosure that the Arab nations are pushing the United States to use force against Iran and its nuclear ambitions?
It didn't surprise me because I've been to the Arab states often and I know how they feel. They've been very concerned, as mostly Sunni nations, about Iran's becoming more and more powerful. And I think they also have made it clear to me that they think that the United States invasion of Iraq, which I thought was an unnecessary action, has been the main thing that has escalated the increased influence of Iran. But there's no doubt that they do very seriously oppose and feel threatened by Iran's possibly becoming a nuclear power.
Well, let's talk about another problem that persists after 40 years, and that is Mideast peace.
I've heard about it, yes.
In 1978, you spent, 10, 11 days at Camp David?
13 days.
With Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin,
yes,
going back and forth from one cabin to another.
That's right.
And you thought you had a deal where there would be no further settlement building in the Palestinian areas.
That's correct.
What happened?
Well, when I first started working on this, I wanted to eliminate the major threat to Israel's existence. And that was Egypt. Of all the Arab countries, Egypt was the only one that could really threaten Israel. And they had been in the forefront of 4 wars in the previous 25 years before I became president. So when I went to Camp David, I had 2 purposes in mind. One was to remove that threat by having an accommodation between Israel and Egypt, and the other one was to give Palestinians their rights, and to have what would later become a 2-state solution in the Middle East. And we worked very hard on both of them equally. And when we left Camp David, we thought we had a complete agreement on the Palestinian rights for the future, with no more settlements being built until after the conclusion of peace talks had been a success. And then the other aspect of it was a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. Because of the interest of, I would say, the more conservative Israelis, they decided later, primarily after I left office, to honor the part treaty between Israel and Egypt, and not a single word of that treaty has ever been violated in now more than 30-some years. But on the Palestinian arena, the Israelis decided to go ahead and continue to take over more and more of the area of Palestine that was under their control. And that's what's happened until now, and still Israel is still occupying the Golan Heights in Syria, a little bit of Lebanon, and they've taken over practically total control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem.
You know that many in the American Jewish community, as well as many in Israel, see you as biased in favor of the Palestinians.
Well, I've never been that. You know, for the last 30 years, I would say that the number one foreign policy goal in my whole life, about which I pray more and work more, is to bring peace to Israel and its neighbors. And you can't bring peace to one without bringing peace to the other.
One of the interesting things that you did in this book is to write an afterword, your thoughts today looking back on those diaries, and you reflect on why you weren't elected to a second term. Tell us about that.
Well, there were 2 or 3 reasons. I would say that the primary reason, I don't have any doubt, was the holding of American hostages and my inability to bring them home on time. We negotiated their release the last 3 days I was in office, and they came home. They were in the airplane at 10 o'clock that morning. They didn't take off until after I left office. But we did bring them home safe and free. But the holding of the hostages was an indication of my inability. And secondly, when Iraq invaded Iran, which I deplored, and I condemned Iraq for it, it cut off all the oil supplies in the whole world from those 2 countries, which created a shortage of oil and an incredible escalation of skyrocketing in prices, which brought about high inflation rate and high interest rates all over the world. And the third thing was the division in the Democratic Party, where the liberal Democrats were basically loyal to Senator Kennedy. I never was able to get all of them back. And so although Reagan got less than 51% of the votes, a third-party candidate, John Anderson, who pretty well inherited Kennedy's support, got 10%. So I lost the election. But I'd say all 3 of those factors were important. I think the number one, though, was hostages.
You write that you maybe didn't pay enough attention to the political aspects of the president's job.
That's true, I didn't. And I mentioned that in passing, but not directly. I think if I'd been more attuned to keeping the Democratic Party intact and more loyal to me, then I would have avoided one of those 3 factors, and that it was a division in the Democratic Party that was split between me and Kennedy, even on election day.